My name is Arnoud De Meyer. I am the President of Singapore Management University, and on top of that, I still remain a truly committed researcher and teacher. I'm a true academic. Quite a while ago, when I was still at University of Cambridge, I discovered, together with my colleague Peter Williamson, that some companies were innovating in a very different way than what we normally thought.
I think it started by looking at a company called Advanced Risk Machines in Cambridge, and we were surprised that it had 98% of the market for a particular type of chips in mobile phones, and yet it was such a small company. We wondered, how can they have such influence and leadership when they have less than a couple of thousand people and they're a small company in Cambridge?
And we actually realized that in Cambridge itself, there were other networks of companies that were not really dependent on each other, not really controlled by each other, but yet working together to get out in innovation. And that reminded me of the fact that the company in which I am still in the board of directors, Dassault Systems, which is in software production, that we actually have a similar way. That is that, yeah, we produce the software, the basis software, the platform, but actually the adjustment of that software to different industries happens by other totally independent companies that work together with us. And so it was intriguing to see how companies actually try to innovate by working in sort of very loose networks and yet well-organized networks.
The insight we came to first was that these companies had realized that they shouldn't try to do everything themselves. But it's more than not doing everything yourself. It's not trying to control everything yourself. Because if you try to control it too tightly, if you see yourself as the sort of spider in the center of the web, you'll constrain the creativity and contribution of the partners. And I think we came to realize in the ARM example, in the Dassault System example, that actually they were saying, we want to bring these people into a loose arrangement, so we allow them the flexibility to be creative and to co-innovate with us.
I think those are indeed two key concepts. That is the co-learning, that is we work together and we learn together, and then the flexibility that is essential in innovation, and a sort of an ecosystem is a lot more flexible than a structured, vertically integrated company that may have other advantages for efficiency and productivity, but when it comes to innovation or actually recreating a new business, I think these ecosystems are a lot more interesting. So we started discovering that, we started teaching about it, we started telling companies that this was an alternative to innovate in circumstances where there is a high level of uncertainty and complexity. And we discovered that there was a good reaction to it, that people said, hey, yes, this is what we want to do. So we basically over the last years have been building up a number of case studies, both in the United States, in Europe, and here in Asia, of how companies work this way. And it's our intention to publish a book about it, not necessarily only about what is the concept, but really about how to manage in such an ecosystem. It's not easy because you cannot tell people do this, do that. You need to actually create some kind of coalitions. You have to convince people to collaborate. You may have to make sure that you have the right collaborators, that you all work in the right and same direction. So it is relatively complicated to manage these ecosystems. And thanks to the many case studies that we have written, we now think that we know how to manage these ecosystems. Since I started my career in industry and I went into academia to understand better how to manage research and development, I've always had the ambition that we shouldn't do research to inform other academics, although that is important, but also that we should do research at a business school or in a university to ensure that we change the way people manage, to change the way companies are evolving. So I believe that it's very important that when we look at our research, we not only do the very academic publications, which is needed because that is the way that you test the quality of your ideas, but at the same time that you have the ambition to translate them to in concepts, in expressions that can be understood by practitioners and who can then implement it. So meaningful impact for me indicates that we want to make a difference. We want to ensure that companies are managed better, that governments understand how some of the policies make a difference for a country. Without that impact, I think that research would be rather uninteresting.